This is the human side of the story and the NHL draft coming up at the end of the week. We have seen so many different iterations from the first ever draft, which was held at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in 1963, to what has evolved to the Sphere in 2024. There have been many different iterations of how this has been conducted. And certainly, Neil, you were part of them when you were selected by the Islanders back in the day.
Yeah, I was. And of course, back in the 1974, they called you to tell you you'd been drafted. They didn't have the players in attendance at the draft like has done today. And it was a much more calm situation in those days than it is now.
Where did you expect to go in the draft that year?
I didn't. I expected to go to the bathroom. I didn't think I'd be drafted.
When you found out it was the Islanders, and of course they drafted Billy Harris first overall in 72, Dennis Potvin in 73. You get selected in 74, albeit you weren't a first round pick, but still the thrill to have been drafted by an NHL team. Couldn't have been.
It was so exciting. And I was on the verge of leaving for Western Michigan University at that time. So to be the first player ever drafted from Western Michigan University was still something I still hold on there. The interesting part about the entry draft, Vic, is that until 1979, it was called the NHL Amateur Draft. And then it's only been a public event since 1980. And I say only, you could say, well, that's 45 years. Yeah, 45 years, but it started in 63. And of course, TSN and Canadian television has been putting it all over the air since 1984.
You had shared an interesting story with me off camera over the past week about how these announcements were made somewhat secretly, and it's a pretty interesting story as to why.
Well, the WHA came into existence in 1972, and the National Hockey League Board of Governors was really worried about the rating that was going on of the NHL from the WHA. And a lot of the players that the New York Islanders took in their initial expansion draft were rated by the WHA, and that's why the New York Islanders had such a pathetic team that first year in 1972-73. The prize they got for being that bad was Dennis Potvin, which is a pretty good prize you get for having suffered through that season. Dennis, of course, being a perennial all-star and a Hall of Fame number one defenseman, and ended up being the captain of 4 straight Stanley Cups for the Islanders.
As you see number one picks get selected, now year after year, you're generational, you're not generational, has the pressure increased with the visibility and social media and just the entire dynamic of the way information is shared now, and it makes players, perhaps even bigger than life than they were, as per se, when Mario Lemieux was taken first overall in 1984. But was the pressure the same then, in your opinion, as it is now, with the spotlight as intense as it is?
I was at the Bedard draft, and it was insane what this 18-year-old kid was doing and being, carried around all over the place to do interviews, to do all this stuff. And he'd gone from being a junior player and living in a billet in Regina to now all of a sudden this household name. And so I guess with that comes a lot of pressure, and particularly when you know that the first overall pick is going to a team that missed the playoffs in all likelihood. And this year it'll be the Islanders, although it won't be a Celebrini or a Bedard. But I don't know that there's the pressure that there used to be. there are more young players playing today than there ever were because there's 32 teams. So I think that takes some of the pressure away. In the 21 team league, an 18-year-old rarely played on the team. Steve Yzerman, Mario Lemieux, of course, Wayne Gretzky started in the WHA, so he didn't even. He played when he was 17, 18 in the NHL. His first year was 79-80. But I don't know that there's more pressure or less pressure now. I think that the teams down at the bottom of a 32-team league really want to improve, and they're hoping that this 18-year-old phenom helps them improve. But it's pretty tough to put that demand on an 18-year-old.
Do you find that the growth of a player is longer or shorter from when, say, 20 or 30 years ago? Because I think when we watch the coverage, and there tends to be always this wrap up that, well, we're not going to know for another 4 to 5 years how good this draft class was. Is it the same as it always was? Or do you think that maybe the years of growth that has slid a little bit in one direction or the other?
I still think it's going to take 3 to 4 years. It might be, you might need less time now to make that judgment than you needed, because there's two things that you got to take into consideration. One is that, as I've already said, you've gone from 21 teams for a long time. Now you've got 32. So you need young players in the league. And so there's going to be more, and then you're going to be able to make those comparisons earlier than you were able to when there was less teams. And the second thing to think about is that players in the 21 team league got paid for what they had already accomplished, so that if you scored 40 goals, you got a big payday on your next contract. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now, the young players are getting all the money, the phenoms, and the old veteran players, i.e. Corey Perry, i.e. Brad Marchand, as compared to the guys who they have to sign who still have 10 years ahead of them. Those are the guys getting all the money. The guys with only a couple of years ahead of them aren't getting the money anymore. So people are getting paid for what they're projected to do, not for what they have already done. And that's a big difference between the era of the 90s and before as opposed to now.
And that next generation arrives at the NHL this coming weekend.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.